Hey everybody, welcome back to the Senators Roundtable. I'm joined as per usual by Paul, Quinney and Dayton Reimer, and we have a very special guest today, Shawn Simpson. How you doing, Simmer?
I'm excellent, boys. Thanks for having me on.
Good. Happy Halloween. Hope you had a busy day and lots of festives. I'm a little upset that you're not wearing a costume for tonight, but
Yeah, not feeling that. Got little bit too much candy though. We didn't have a whole lot, so I ended up buying the candy that my girlfriend's boys that are teenagers don't like, but I've now found that they do like. So it certainly won't go to waste. But yeah, it was a little quiet. I was expecting a little more action.
yeah, good stuff. I feel like
Yeah,
Halloween's gotten a lot quieter over the past few years, even just over the last 7, 8 years.
yeah.
Yeah. How are you guys doing, Paul? Dayton?
I'm really well. I was out, as I said, I was out with my grandson helping him trick or treat. So that gave me the opportunity to dip into his candy bag there just
Nice.
for quality control
Oh,
purposes.
absolutely. Hey, it's not like when we were young, Paul, and people would put like muffins in there and apples.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Times have changed. There's about six different candy bars now, and that's all you're getting, and everybody likes
Yeah.
them. Hey?
I used to hate apples when you got an
Oh,
apple.
gee.
Oh,
Yeah, that's
come
not.
on.
You should throw that back at their house. Like that's not even. And any type of baked goods, that's you
Yeah,
come back and
that's
egg the
good.
house after that. This is not
Well,
even
hey, now
necessary to
some
do that.
baked goods can be pretty good.
Well,
I'll
that's true.
like
I just
a
don't
muffin or
trust
a
in depending
cupcake.
who it's coming from. Hey?
Yeah,
True.
that's true.
Yeah.
Um, and Dayton, how are you?
Oh, pretty good. Yeah, I'm a little bit behind you guys in the time, so we're currently getting trick-or-treaters, and
Oh,
if you hear
nice.
any doorbells or knocks, that's why.
Yeah. Mhm.
Oh,
Last year, I
it's
think we had like
Saskatchewan.
70 or 80 kids show up.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, we're
Good
down in
stuff.
the suburbs,
Yeah.
and we'll see if we can beat that this year. We're
Yeah.
ready for them this time.
Yeah. Good.
Good stuff. So before we get into all the Ottawa Senators talk, I just wanted to let everybody know that we all have dedicated team Substacks now with the hockeywriters.com. So if you're looking for your weekly content, all the articles posted to the Hockey Writers will be sent right to your mailbox. And we have a premium subscription now. And so you can get live questions and answers, live game chats, pre and post game news, and all that good stuff. So if you want to look out for the best Ottawa Senators content, be sure to subscribe to that. So, the biggest news in Ottawa right now is revolving around you, Simmer. You got a podcast coming. You want to talk about that a
Yeah.
little bit?
Yeah. Again, I basically have been about 5 months since I've been off, so just some time to kind of regroup and enjoy a bit of a summer. And then yeah, just didn't have an exact plan. Wanted to be something right, so that'll be coming pretty soon. I'll do a live one Monday to Friday at noon. And the release is here coming up pretty shortly. There'll be more news to follow this week. So yeah, just excited to get back at it, boys. Not the same as obviously the job I had at TSN, but certainly lots of opinions and excitement with the Sen season. So thanks for allowing me to give a little plug there.
Yeah, absolutely. And love the name Simmer Down. Um,
Oh
you're
yeah.
you're locked in on that area.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, you put it to a vote, and they kind of come up with a few different things. And so yeah, that's the one that people seem to glam onto. A little simmer time, a little simmer down, but it'll just be basically a nice lunch chat. Certainly a different in this market now with the radio situation and just overall. I thought what a perfect kind of day to tackle something, do something live. And I know it'll play around, guys, but having done live radio for 11 years, I love the feeling of being live. Like I love the feeling of if you're making mistakes or you're doing that, there's an energy around that when we used to tape interviews, I just had the weirdest feeling. No, I'm not saying right now we're sitting here, but to me, it's man, the excitement of being live. There's just something a little bit different. So it should be a whole lot of fun.
Yeah, and it's fun. You have to be able to laugh at yourself, and whenever you
Oh
have
God, yeah,
fumble
yeah.
your words instead of just sit
Well,
there and
you're not even regulated. I don't even know where it might go. I mean, I'm certainly not going to cross any crazy lines, but that was always the dance when you're on TSN. Old JR had to kind of rein me in a little bit, but it won't be anything, but it is an interesting dynamic now where kind of hey, you get on and talk, and when you want to stop, you stop. It's not regulated by or certainly as strict as what we have on radio.
exactly, and you can kind of bring the conversation anywhere you want. You're not within
Exactly.
all these guidelines and whatnot. So
No, and as everybody knows, you have no idea where my mind's going to go, so it allows for a lot of free thinking.
yeah,
Should be
absolutely.
fun.
Well, what was that, Paul?
Should be fun.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
thanks
looking
very
forward
much,
to
Paul.
hearing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So first thing that I kind of wanted to cover in terms of hockey news
Yeah.
is the tragedy of Adam Johnson over the past.
Holy.
It's like there's so much going on with that right now, and all the conversation. So the EIHA, the league above him in England, already put the mandate out for January 1st for neck guards.
Yeah.
Where do we think that this is going to end up in North American sports? I saw that the Pittsburgh Penguins announced that their AHL and ECHL team are going to start mandating.
Yeah. It won't go anywhere. I mean, this is really when, unfortunately, I remember in the 90s, and I don't remember if the player in the Quebec League died, and I obviously was friends with Clint Malarchuk. There was a whole rash of these things happened at the time, guys, and nothing was ever done of it. Now, I know the Quebec League was the first one. I do have a bit of an issue as well, and I see some of the kids in minor hockey, that neck guard that they're wearing, I don't know. I guess it does something. But for some of them, it's been crumpled up and left in a bag that I don't think that thing covers more than a centimeter. So what'll happen? It'll be regulated. But this is way more reactive than proactive. What I guess I'm trying to figure out, and I never even thought of it when I first saw the hit. Like I can't still figure out whether or not the fella meant to raise his leg or not. But whatever it ends up being, they could use some more protection. But it's the same thing, guys. Same thing when you had the Achilles with Erik Karlsson. There's a company right here in Ottawa that supplies socks that too hot. When you look at players' cuffs on their gloves, they get slashed all the time. They get broken wrists. It's not comfortable. It's not good. It was the same with visors, same with helmets. If you want to regulate it, put it in. They'll do it. They'll be fine. At some point, we'll probably get to that. And we'll probably get to mass happening. But if you're going to do anything where the NHL players can choose it or not, nothing's going to happen. But like I said, I'm surprised in the United States they haven't had this, where at least in minor hockey in Canada they've had it. I would just question as to, exactly how protective some of those devices are. Almost looks like a neck chain you'd wear out on a date.
Yeah, and you see a lot of these
more likely the female, but I mean, just saying.
Well, you never know.
Yeah.
You see all these big companies that make these protective gear, they're starting to say, like, let's focus on how we can make these comfortable and how we can
sure, yeah
kind of make them in a way that NHL players might want to wear them. And obviously, unless you grandfather it in, you're not going to get everybody wearing them.
Well, and it's something as simple, guys, and it is crazy, but these are hockey players. I don't care that they're playing in the National Hockey League. If you're the one guy wearing it, you're going to get chirped. It's about being cool too. I remember years ago in Washington, a bunch of our players started wearing ear guards, and guys are like, what are you doing there? Europeans, and you're afraid it's too hot. And look at our guy like Artem Zub. When you're a defenseman killing penalties in the National Hockey League, like it's almost foolish that you wouldn't be wearing an ear guard, certainly a visor for that matter. So like I said, all these things are funny, but you got to mandate it for the players, because otherwise they quite simply aren't going to do it.
Yeah, and I think that's the way to do it.
Yeah. So Simmer, talk to me some more about Malarchuk, because that incident happened, if I've got this right, in '89. He was playing with the Sabres.
Yeah.
But a lot of observers say that since that incident, that prompted goaltenders to wear protection. What's your view?
For sure. Oh no, it's gotten better. I kind of went with my junior hockey, and a little bit before that, kind of the open thing, the Billy Smith look and Pete Peters. It certainly changed without a doubt, but that was as much from puck protection. And I think for most goaltenders will just tell you, just being comfortable in the crease, having this part, and then you had a lot of guys wearing the hanging piece. The other nice piece that came along when the one piece goalie mask came, and unfortunately Clint had it on, but it was a gentleman out of Toronto at the time, and I had the mask. It was outstanding, but it did have at least enough of that coming down. For a lot of guys, as you tucked in, there was a fair amount of protection, but that next layer, it just kind of got, I think most guys got used to it, but I think that was just kind of evolving of the equipment. I don't even know if that was directly attributed to Clint. And like I said, I know the Quebec League ended up having them, but the rest of the group has not really followed suit. But certainly the goaltenders nowadays, I don't think there's a more protected player on the ice than the goalies.
Yeah.
Bunch of Michelin men sitting in the blue paint.
Yeah, they really are. Like I said, what's crazy now is, first of all, the size of them, but your biggest fear as a goaltender now is getting a concussion. This is all completely, changed as to what you fear amongst many of the positions. And for a goaltender, it's quite simply that kind of, that spot you're in where you're in no man's land when you're in a butterfly, where you're so susceptible to that head contact.
Yeah, but I agree. I don't think much is going to come of this. If you look at the incidents of players being cut, and it's rare. What happened to Johnson was probably a freak accident.
I think the biggest question going forward, guys, is whether or not they're going to press charges. Like Man,
Yeah.
I don't like to hear, like in the United States on Fox News, they're talking about it. I don't like a person that hasn't played hockey, but I'll be honest with you. I don't know what to make of the darn. I just wasn't prepared for that. I thought it was another one of those guy leaned over and the skate ends up coming up. This whole situation here is kind of like WWE. So just terrible on every side.
Yeah. And Dayton, I'll ask you your opinion in a second here. But there was just one of Adam's teammates just came out. This was maybe 2 hours ago now. I don't know if you would have seen it. But there was a statement and he said, like, everybody saying that this is intentional is kind of off the rails and whatnot.
Okay.
Obviously, I'm paraphrasing.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I believe he was one of the players on the ice that kind of witnessed this. And his point of view says that he doesn't think it was intentional. But you never know. The skate did come up really high. And I like to think that hockey players are better than that. And obviously,
well, in this particular case, with it happening so quickly, I don't think it would be planned. I guess it's just I've never seen it happen, which doesn't mean anything. It's just more, I don't think the guy came across the line after taking contact and meant to basically do like a karate kick on a guy. So no, I don't. It's just like I said, it's because I've never seen anything like this in my entire life, and I guess with the velocity of it, right? I mean, my God. So yeah, very, very sad.
But there is a police investigation, right?
Yeah. Well, and I don't want to say that, but for non-hockey countries, although I think one of the few arrests we've ever had in hockey was Dino Ciccarelli on Luke Richardson when happened in Toronto. But certainly to the person that has never watched hockey, they do kind of think of it as being WWE. And I'm sure for the people over there, they see a soccer player go down once in a while. They must see something like this and think this is absolutely crazy. So it would be interesting to see how it's being interpreted.
Yeah, absolutely. So Dayton, finally getting to you. Do you think the NHL is going to make any moves on this?
Like, I'm hopeful, but I think I agree with the other two guys here. It's probably not going to happen. It does feel like hockey players, especially, are very resistant to any sort of change, especially when it affects their comfort and their mobility. And then we were talking about goalies, or you guys were, and how big they are. Do you remember in the 90s and 2000s just how massive those goaltenders were? Like, that was ridiculous. And they put in rules like, okay, you can't have extra large pads anymore.
Yeah, the width of the pads, and certainly the Garth Snow effect with the shoulder pads, and they've tried their best to mandate it. You can certainly argue that, when you look at goalie pants now, I was in a sports store years ago and I saw some goalie pants. I didn't know what they were. They were kind of sitting on the floor as you were kind of would step into them, and I was looking twice as to what this was, and I realized, man, I might have had a chance if I had decent equipment back in the day. For those of you who don't know, I was actually a goalie. But yeah, they've done the best that they can. Well, what's also changed, guys, the monsters that play the position. Like I said, who would have thought in my lifetime that you could be a 5'10" defenseman or a 5'9" forward, but as a goaltender, you had to be 6'3". In the 80s when I came through junior, if you're a defenseman, you're not more than 6'2", they're not even looking at you. So certainly interesting to see how that's applied itself at the same time.
Yeah, it's wild to see that, like, a goalie standing 6'1" is considered too small for the NHL.
Yeah. UC Saros. And I also want to know where they're breeding these guys, in reindeer villages or something over in Russia, Finland and Sweden. And who would have also thought the four best goaltenders, arguably, in the NHL could be Russian? We have Shesterkin, Sorokin, Vasilevsky, and Gorgiev. I mean, that in itself, from the 1980s, the Russians are like, where were those guys then?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right. It's crazy, the anomaly of, like, we see the different eras of which countries are sending which, like, you see the era of the Russian wingers, like we just kind of went through.
For sure.
Like, you got Kucherov, Panarin, Kaprizov, all that. Now we're into the goalies. Like, it's crazy to see how they just kind of come in waves.
Yeah, interesting. In Russia, a big part of it is Finland was the one that really had kind of caught the wave. And so many of the Finnish goaltender coaches have gone into Russia. And because there is a layer of money with the higher end athlete, that's what's really become the focal point. A lot of money goes into it, and it's a total Finnish influence that's happened in Russia.
Yeah, it's good to see, though. Good, more diversity in the league. So
absolutely.
Good stuff. So let's start talking some Sens here. Shane Pinto just got his 41-game suspension. There's not too much news to talk about here. Most of that's already out and old news by now, but it's retroactive to the first game of the season. He'll likely end up signing his qualifying offer he doesn't need to be signed under contract to serve the suspension, which I found a little bit weird, but I don't know. the parameters of the suspension. No details have really come out at all. Dayton, what do you think? Like, do you think that this is going to be something we see more of in the NHL? People coming down on the gambling rules.
I think maybe a little bit, but it won't last very long. I was chatting with actually my dad the other day, talking some baseball. And of course, Pinto comes up in the conversation, and that led to the discussion on Pete Rose. So he got banned basically for life from baseball for betting on games.
Yep.
And it always seems that when betting issues arise in professional sports, the leagues come down almost, it seems like too hard.
Yeah.
Because they really want to make a statement with that. Like my dad, I mean, he grew up in that era watching Pete Rose play. He thinks he's a Hall of Famer. He doesn't think he's a good person, but a heck of a player, right?
Yeah.
And that is, at least to him, what qualifies someone for the Hall of Fame. But baseball likely will never reinstate him. There's just, it's too nuanced almost an issue to back down from what they've already stated. And there was reports coming out about Pinto working his way down to a 41 game suspension.
Yeah.
So I think if anything, like even sniffs these rules that the NHL's put in against, betting now, especially that their main sponsors are betting apps and companies, they're going to be incredibly quick and incredibly harsh with it. And so I can foresee, like maybe over the next couple of years, a couple more guys facing these really nasty suspensions, and then probably tapers off after that. It's kind of, I don't know. That's how I see it.
Yeah. So Simmer, do you think that this was more about a punishment for what Pinto did, or do you think it's more about setting a precedent?
Well, again, go back to Pete Rose, guys. A couple of things. First of all, as a Hall of Famer, that's as a baseball player. He was involved with organized crime. He was betting from the dugout as a manager of a team. The integrity of the sport is covered to a point where I have no time for you whatsoever. Like, come on. Now, I can debate whether he should be in the Hall of Fame as a player. Absolutely, which he should be probably. But he's such a jerk that people just don't have the time for it. But that's a whole different line you're crossing. When you go back to the Black Sox, when you go back to Shave Point and it happened with Arizona State in the 90s, when you get into these types of things where you're altering games, you're involved with bookmakers, what has happened now is that gambling is legal. Quite simply, what happened with Shane Pinto is somebody else was using his app, and not only did they use it for betting, they ended up betting on hockey. So I think he's very lucky that the National Hockey League, first of all, believed him, and that secondly, he was able to, make sure that they would realize that it wasn't him doing it. I don't think and if other players in the future are going to be stupid enough to go on a legal app and bet on it, or on their own sport, or bet with illegal gambling, then they deserve whatever punishment. But I don't think too many people, and like I said, I think Shane Pinto should feel very lucky that he didn't get more. I mean, how would you explain that? Because I'm sure all the guys have the betting apps. All of them are betting on football, which is fine. But somebody comes on your app and bets on hockey, man, oh man, that is a ridiculous and immature situation that he got a little slap on the wrist. So I don't see there being much more. Wouldn't think there'd be a whole lot more people that are that stupid to do that.
Yeah, and like all these details about what actually happened are starting to come out, mostly through like Elliot Friedman, Pierre LeBrun. All of them are kind of letting these details out. But like every team, I think they need to be more clear about what the rules are in terms of what you can and can't do. Obviously, the proxy betting that happened with Pinto, that's obviously crossing a line. But where is the line? Yeah. Because every team.
The line is, if you're going to sign up with any type of app that has your name on it, the last thing you should be doing is betting on your own sport. I mean, that's a pretty simple line. And when people kind of looked at gray areas of this, because people were kind of couching it like, well, they're saying he didn't bet on hockey and you're allowed to bet on other sports that they're going to suspend him. Well, no, somebody else used his app to bet on hockey. So I don't know how it could be any more black and white other than he should be thankful.
Yeah, fair enough. Paul, what do you make of the whole situation, the whole gambling suspension and all that?
Well, I don't know what the hell he did. Clear as mud, right? The NHL comes out and says he's suspended for activities relating to sports wagering, whatever that is, but he didn't bet on NHL games. So he created a lot of confusion. I fault the NHL here for some really lousy communications. If if the suspension and the press release that explained it was intended to teach a lesson to anybody or delineate the boundaries of what you can and what you can't bet on, it failed miserably. It was a lost opportunity. There's a perception, if I go into my beer league hockey room, everybody thinks that the rule is players can bet on anything they want as long as it's not NHL games, when in fact, under the CBA, the collective bargaining agreement, the NHL, Gary Bettman can discipline any player for betting on anything, including tiddlywink tournaments in Poughkeepsie, New York, if they do it in a way, that brings into disrepute the league or the game of hockey. So I don't know what he did, but it sure would have been nice, I think, and better for the league if they just come out. They don't have to share the gory details, but at least be more specific about the types of things that can get you in this situation. I think it's really too bad, though, for Pinto. I feel for the kid. He's 22, and people are saying, well, he's the NHL's Pete Rose. I agree with Simmer. That's not a valid comparison whatsoever. Rose was a criminal, and what this kid did was probably something stupid. He didn't realize he was doing it. So, but
and your biggest fear, guys, is that you become leveraged. Pete Rose became leveraged with organized crime. So now once they have you, I guess on a legal app, you could still get yourself into so much financial trouble that you may try to alter a sporting event. So you haven't covered that off, but like I said, nowadays we're in such. The other thing I'll say behind the scenes, which helps, is that certainly between the FBI and the RCMP, they are navigating this so closely. You think back to obviously the point shaving that happened in the NBA with the referee. The monitoring now of what goes on with this and where cash bets are made and how much is made, and there's a real tracking system to this. So, like I said, a little bit new to North America, certainly not new when it comes to Europe. They've had more than their fair share of scandals.
Right.
But I think as a result of this, there's going to be a renewed emphasis on working with the younger kids that come in, and they are kids, right? 21, 22. Yeah. Just say, hey guys, here's what you can't do, and if there's there's going to be a whole program set up, because this was completely unnecessary. If the NHL had been fostering some of these young kids, and laying out where they can't go beyond.
Yeah, at least these NHL players have the chance to pay off their debts. I mean, I can't even imagine right now as a young person probably smoke up a nice joint, and I wasn't even a joint. I was a beer guy. Hey, I'm going to get high because it's legal, and I'm going to get on my app here and start betting away on the next face-off. Before you know it, I'm even more in a hole when I have no money to start with.
But I think in a previous life, I came from the corporate world, and there was just the implicit understanding is that at no point even in your free time can you do anything that will bring into disrepute your employer or the industry that you work in. And if you do, so do what your mother told you, clean yourself up, and lead a decent life, and you won't be in this situation. But I think it was just a lack of judgment on Pinto's part.
Yeah,
totally. Yeah. And that's kind of why I see this popping up a few more times at least, because the lines are kind of gray. Like, people don't exactly know what they could be punished for. And Pinto, unfortunately, is going to be a bit of this kind of standard. Like, he set the bar. This is what the NHL will do for some sort of gambling violation. And it's unfortunate that it did happen to this kid, and he screwed up. He did something stupid. But yeah, I don't think we're going to see the last suspension for betting. I don't think it's going to happen a lot, but it's definitely not the last.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the first of all of the drama that's going on in Ottawa this week. Let's move on to the more recent and up-to-date story with Evgenii Dadonov. So Simmer, you've been letting out a lot of information, mostly from the Vegas side.
Yeah.
But just to kind of refresh everybody, if you're not up to date, about 2 years ago, trade deadline, Ottawa traded Evgenii Dadonov over to before the trade deadline, Ottawa traded Dadonov to Vegas for Nick Holden and a third-round pick.
They actually trade him in the summertime, and then the trade of Dadonov happened at the deadline.
Yeah. So it was just over 2 years ago that the trade happened. And Ottawa didn't report the no trade clause, the 10-team submitted list. And Vegas tried to trade him to the Anaheim Ducks at the trade deadline. And at the final hour, it was vetoed by the NHL. And Vegas was arms in the air, wondering, like, why would you do this to us? What's the issue? Mm-hmm. So it was the agent that was fighting, saying, we're not going to Anaheim. It's on our no trade list. So, Simmer, you let out a lot of details over the past few days. Want to get everybody up on to speed on what you know?
Well, again, it kind of goes back to, and it's hard on Twitter to explain to people, quite simply, when you have a trade in the National Hockey League, once you've made a trade, both parties get on a call with Central Registry. You go through in a fine-tooth comb, and it used to be a lot more difficult because contracts back in the day had all kinds of clauses for bonuses. You actually had at one time when you went to Canada, you were paid in Canadian sums. The contracts now are super standard. There's really nothing to cover off on, but it is still an opportunity to understand, hey, what are bonuses are left? Who's responsible for what? You make sure everybody's on the same page, and then you move along. What is addressed in the call, from what I understand, and this is the part of people are like wondering, okay, first of all, let's agree they're coming after Ottawa. They're not coming after Vegas. Okay. They're not, I don't know where people want to then talk about, hey, something happened here. Vegas at the time was absolutely pissed off. Their thought and what they're saying is, we went through and asked, listen, we know there's a no movement clause. It's listed right there. Has the player updated his 10-team list? They were basically told no at the time, quite simply. It wasn't a matter of, oh, well, no, he didn't resubmit it. If you don't resubmit it, then basically you're free and it's gone. So if that's the case, and that's what was said, and at the time they basically filed a grievance with the National Hockey League. As to why it's taken so long, I have no idea. But this isn't a question of a clerical mistake. And I have some further details. And again, I talked to people directly in Vegas right after this. It leads me to believe that somebody was not telling the truth when this went down. And this is why this is so serious from the National Hockey League and why Ottawa's in so much trouble. And I raised a huge red flag at the time. And typical to what happens here in Ottawa a lot of times is that it was brushed off. And Vegas, they should have done, hey, listen, you make a trade with another general manager. If there's a no movement clause, I'm not calling the agent after the fact to say, hey, is this true? You accept with the other 32 now, if 31, the 32 that are in the league, we have a call. This is a call with the National Hockey League. You're telling me there's no movement clause, that he hasn't refiled, then I'm taking your word for it. So it never came up until that trade deadline. So that's why Ottawa appears to be in trouble, and why something's going to happen, maybe fairly significant to the Ottawa Senators.
So when the call goes through and they're talking to Central Registry, how do they not flag that? Is it because Ottawa didn't submit it to the Central Registry?
Well, it's not technically submitted. What ends up happening, and then this is part of the argument that came after the fact, is that that's not registered with Central Registry. It's basically something the team has in there. With Central Registry, they know you have a modified no trade, which is usually 10 teams, or you have a full no movement. Well, a full no movement is basically the player is accepted to waive it. On the 10 team, it's a list that needs to be updated every year. A lot of agents and players don't do the due diligence to do that. So you say, no, didn't end up filing it as of July 1st or whatever the day ends up being. So now you're turning around and trade him. And I'm telling you, man to man, there is no 10-team list, when obviously there was. Let's face facts here. The agent was smart enough to file it. He knew it. The player knew it. But certainly in the case, Vegas did not know it. And why did this end up happening from the Ottawa side? Was it an oversight? Well, again, I find that really, really hard to believe, having sat in on those trade calls. Somebody, and I'll use a very cautious term, somebody certainly misinformed Vegas as to what was going on. And that doesn't go sit well with your other peers in the National Hockey League when you're a general manager.
Well, and the biggest part of that is that Vegas missed the playoffs that year, that they tried to trade Dadonov.
Well, they stunk anyway, and he had 16 points down the stretch. So I don't think it alters it, guys. It's just more that Jacob, this is last minute. There was nothing else you could turn around and do. So, had this been last year, imagine if it was last year. And I know people don't like Vegas and you're trying to manipulate the cap, but imagine if this trade got in your way and you didn't win the Stanley Cup. You know what I mean? So you can push all that stuff aside, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter how he performed, whether they missed the playoffs or not. Quite simply, they were misled at the trade deadline.
Yeah, and I can only imagine the frustration that Kelly McCrimmon would have had, like, dealing with this, because he's like, okay, I did all this legwork to get this deal done and whatnot, and then all of a sudden any plans that I had moving forward, whether it be I don't know what their cap situation was like at that exact day.
Oh, they're always over the cap, but it was also, it made them look foolish. It was, everyone was laughing at them. That's why I think this has come so strong, and why they probably let it go this long is like, listen, we're going to get to the end of this, because it was really being leaked back out of Ottawa that it made Vegas look bad, which I know really pissed off the people in Vegas, that made Ottawa look bad. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. So before we get into kind of what the punishment might look like, we're going to take a real quick break, and we will be right back. All right, and this is just a reminder about the Ottawa Senators Substack, and make sure you're getting the best content available to you. The link will be down in the description if you want to check that out. We have a free version, we have a trial for the premium option, and we have the paid premium option, of course. So, yeah, make sure to go check that out. Thank you. All right, so we talked about Dadonov and what the situation was. Now, what do we think the punishment is going to look like? There's rumors spiraling about it being a first-round pick. A couple people were talking about how Vegas might want their third-round pick back. Obviously, that was sent to Vancouver, but just a third-round pick from Ottawa, just as kind of a, here you go, sorry for doing that to you, whatever. But it sounds like we're going to find out in the next few days. Do you have any kind of insight on that, Simmer?
I have none. And I think the first round pick got thrown out early. I don't know how any of us. Gary Bettman makes decisions on 41 games for Shane Pinto. I was in Nassau Coliseum the other day. Dale Hunter got suspended for 21. You just pick it out. I mean, this guy rules, whatever he wants to end up doing. So trying to guess on that. And I guess what I'll ask you guys, and because you've termed it, Jacob, when I've heard in the past that there might be a fine or first round pick, one of the things I brought up today and I had not heard was, okay, does the first round pick go away, or does it go to Vegas? Because anytime you end up having a tampering situation, I'll go back to the Jersey Devils, took them years with the St. Louis Blues to find a note from a secretary of tampering on Scott Stevens before they ended up getting a tampering reward. Well, it didn't make the pick go away. Of course, the pick ended up going to St. Louis. So this will be the tougher part for Sens fans. It's one thing if you end up losing your first round pick. It's another thing if that ends up going back to Vegas. And as far as a monetary fine, well, I would assume Andlauer would prefer to pay $1 million at this point than lose a first round pick after you just bought a hockey team. So that's my thought on it, Paul and Dayton.
Yeah. So we'll start with you, Paul. What do you think of, like, if this far down the road? I mean, obviously the NHL had their investigation, but this far down the road, what would you make of any kind of punishment coming out, whether it is a pick or a pick transfer or a fine?
Well, I'm with Simmer. I mean, I don't have a clue. You'd have to be able to read Gary Bettman's mind, and God help you if you could do that. I just want to go back, and I don't want to throw this conversation off too much, but I want to go back to Simmer. Given this debacle and everything that led up to it, what do you think it says about the strength of the Ottawa organization? I mean, one of the charges that's constantly leveled at the organization is that it's weak, it's unprofessional, they don't have the right people in place. Is that what we're looking at here?
Well, in this case, Paul, and this is the weird part, and this is just coming from the Vegas side, when you generally go to have these trade calls, you never are in the room by yourself. And in this particular case, Peter McTavish was the assistant general manager. Of all people, Pierre Maguire and then Trent Mann or Troy Mann, whichever one's a scout, would have all been around the team at that time because of the trade deadline. So, I'm sorry, that would have been the summertime. But my point being is that this is very weird. What ended up going down is that I was told Pierre Dorion took the call by himself. And again, this is just coming from the Vegas side. And that, no matter how many people you have, the Ottawa Senators have still built up a very good team. They've still done a lot of good things. They've still negotiated a lot of contracts. Something this simple has nothing to do with manpower. It's quite simply whether or not somebody was flat out lying, Paul. And that's where, like I said, we're not talking about this 18 months later, unless somebody thinks somebody's lying. Like it's not, this isn't bad on Vegas, Paul. That's the part I keep going back to. And when I was told that part, and again, just from the Vegas side, you never do that. You're never in a trade call because, again, it is talked about, and it's probably even taped by the league, but you want your own witness in the room. And now you ask yourself, well, why wasn't, and pretty good chance the person that negotiated that contract was Peter McTavish. He was assistant general manager. He's one that did contracts at the time. If the case, and this is, again, just getting from one side, if he was not in the room, why was that? That is that's one you're going to have to explain away.
No, I've negotiated a lot of contracts in a previous life, and you're dead right. You don't sit down on a contract call without someone else being in the room.
Yeah,
And that's just a sign of a professional organization. And the fact that he took the call by himself kind of speaks to some
and I'm always careful, guys, and even more when I worked for TSN to always say, but the issue with the Ottawa Senators is you never get the truth. Like my boss and JR was so great, but he'd say make sure you're fair and balanced and you try to get. And I'm like, well, the Sens won't tell you anything anyway. So and when it first came up, like I said, I remember just saying to JR, I'm like, this is a really big deal. And it was just kind of pushed away. And I was like, wow, and then I had not heard anything of it. I know other people broke the story, it was coming back, but really, as I said, knowing the Vegas people and knowing something like this, how serious it is, it does not surprise me whatsoever.
Yeah. Dayton, is there anything you wanted to add to that kind of conversation?
Not a bunch. I was just sort of reflecting on previous punishments that the NHL's doled out for tampering. And the two that come to mind are the Devils, not for Scott Stevens, for the Ilya Kovalchuk contract, and the Arizona Coyotes with the draft combine stuff. Both of them were charged a first-round pick.
Yeah.
Now, with the Devils, they got to push that back 3 years, and it didn't really feel like a punishment, which is good because I kind of cheer for them. Not to put myself against the Senators here, but
Well, what's interesting, Dayton, as you go through that, and that is a part of the circumstances are all very different. Like a tampering charge between St. Louis and New Jersey, I'm filing to basically get compensation. You get compensation in that. The New Jersey Devils, I don't think it had anything to do with tampering. It was an illegal contract, was it not, that they filed? So the pick goes away. It's not going to somebody else. Right. And in the case of Arizona, they ended up testing players before the combine, so they end up losing their own pick. This circumstance, and I think one of the other arguments is the whole Chicago Blackhawks situation. Well, that pick wasn't going to go to another team, but why in this case of all these other things, why would you have not taken a pick away from them? So those are the different terms where you do in this case have two teams locked in that have filed a grievance amongst each other. So ultimately, is Vegas looking for the pick back or compensation financially or picks wise? So each of those circumstances, like I say, being very different on how they're handled, but more to the point of it's impossible to know. Like what Arizona realistically did was nothing earth shattering. You know what I mean? That was not a very big deal. And then to look at the Chicago situation and think, come on, you got to be kidding me that we end up basically getting a financial fine for one of the wealthiest clubs in the National Hockey League.
I do recognize that. Those situations super different. But what I think links them is the NHL kind of has a favorite punishment, and it's the first round pick. That it's a punishment that hurts, and it makes a statement. And the fact that Chicago wasn't punished with that is somewhat strange.
What's also funny is how the league ends up working, because here you go back to, and if you go back a couple of other circumstances that happened years ago, Lou Lamoriello had made poor qualifying offers on a couple of players. I think John Madden and Brian Rafalski turned around the next day and called Bill Zito his agent and got them both extended when they could have been unrestricted free agents. Same circumstance happened with Chicago. Those players were renegotiated, but Dale Talon lost his job over it. This circumstance here in Ottawa is as well pointing to somebody, and that is the case of Chicago with Stan Bowman and some of the other staff, including Joel Quenneville. Pretty good chance somebody's out of a job here if that's what comes down here, because there will be nowhere to hide. Somebody has quite simply lied in a circumstance, and once your club, and I don't care if it's a new owner or the old owner, that is going to end up probably being a parallel to what happened in Chicago.
So that's a great transition into kind of our next talking point is what's the future of Pierre Dorion looking like? So we had Brent Wallace on 5-6 weeks ago now, and we talked to him, and he said that he would be surprised if both DJ Smith and Pierre Dorion make it 3 months into the season. That was kind of his take. Between kind of, I guess you can throw the whole Pinto contract situation over your shoulder and forget about that because of the whole suspension. But where are we sitting at with Pierre Dorion, do you think?
Guys, I have no idea, and I don't like to speculate on him getting fired. I'm not a huge Pierre Dorion fan, and God, I knew his dad growing up, and at one time was very good friends with Pierre when I worked in the industry. But what's gone down here in Ottawa and the way things have been handled, I'm not a huge fan. The part of this, a couple of things, like letting go the general manager right now when you've got Steve Staios and if other people are coming in, isn't that big of a deal. What is quite simply, and I'm sure Paul understands, and he already made the point, if you are now basically the person that is responsible for what happened, you're going to be fired with cause. And I believe Pierre Dorion has a couple more years on his contract. So I'm not saying Andlauer is waiting for that, but I don't think it's a big deal one way or another. I think their whole idea was come in like any company that's taken over, assess what you have, get a lay of the land, don't do anything crazy, and then go from there. But putting a timeline, DJ Smith will quite simply be based on wins and losses. How it's handled with Pierre Dorion, this could end up being the end to it. Anything beyond that, guys, I really have no clue.
Yeah. So would you, if they end up getting docked a first round pick, is this something you would put under grounds for firing?
Oh, absolutely. Again, and if it is trailed back to one individual, this isn't just grounds for firing. This is grounds for probably not being able to work in hockey again. I mean, that is a very, very serious circumstance of what had gone down, and basically how other managers and how other hockey people would feel about you going forward as far as a trust level.
Yeah, that's a great point. Dayton, what do you think?
Yeah, like Simmer said, it's never fun to speculate about someone losing their job, but Dorion kind of has cemented his legacy now. He was the man in charge for all this stuff, and now that it's come out, it's come to light. Like that's a terrible look, and I was very willing in that podcast with Wallace to focus on Dorion's good parts. Like he signed some fantastic contracts with Stützle and Tkachuk and Sanderson. Like that's something that he did. That was great. That's a big part of why the Senators can be competitive. You can also look at some of the other contracts, but every GM's got bad contracts. Not every GM has this. I wanted to say that he'd make it this season. I don't see that happening anymore. This is a mess, and someone's got to clean it up really quickly.
Yeah, and I mean the hiring of Steve Staios above him already. That kind of there's your installation if you need to fire him. If you don't have somebody coming in right away, you have Staios there. You have somebody already that can do that job. But there's also been the rumors of Peter Chiarelli coming into town. Who knows what's going to happen there? But yeah, so there's not a whole bunch other, like we could speculate for hours about this. But there's not a whole bunch of news about this situation quite yet. We'll hopefully have that for next week's episode. And maybe by your first episode, Simmer.
Sens usually put out news on a Friday, so I'm hoping they wait a couple more. Or actually, this is the league's case. I thought, well, they won't do it. Well, it happened Tuesday. Well, it's Halloween. Thursday's a game day, so I'm targeting. Well, now we're hearing that the Sens are pushing back, which in itself is a discussion because I don't think when the Bettman comes down with these types of things that I can't remember him ever reversing course, even if you are a new owner. And I have to think Andlauer was more than aware when buying the team as to what was happening here.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll just kind of move into the last kind of point for today, and it's DJ Smith. Again, we're not going to sit here and speculate whether we think he should be fired or not. We never want to see somebody lose their job, but he's definitely on probably the hottest seat in the NHL right now. You could argue Jay Woodcroft, but I don't think he's going anywhere. But yeah, just there hasn't been the results. He said today that the expectation was a 500 team through October. Like I think that's ridiculous because that's a very low standard to set. And I know that you agree with that, Simmer.
Well, no. And again, I like to, when Paul, one of the things, and I know you can have smooth talkers, like when you look at competency and you look at people talk, and I know DJ Smith is kind of a throwback coach and the players seem to love him. When you have a press conference with Pierre Dorion, again, I don't know what confidence as a consumer or as a person, then people throw in the language issue. And I've known Pierre for 30 years. You just shake your head at the stuff he says. And I don't know. And again, we're in Canada. You're hanging on every word. DJ Smith doesn't mean to say it, but it's like Pierre Dorion saying the rebuild is over, right? And like you're saying to yourself, why wouldn't you come with the mindset you want to be the Boston Bruins this year? You got everybody other than Pinto in place. You know what we want to actually do? We want to be 8-0. Like, why do we want to be 500? Do I think that DJ Smith and Pierre Dorion are going to take the Ottawa Senators to the promised land? Absolutely not. Zero chance that coaching staff is going to take it to the next level. The mistakes, and the players love them. You can see that, but they don't play properly. They don't play properly as a team. And I could have coached Stutz, look at Chuck and Sanderson, not saying the rest of the guys. I could open the door, let them play, and you know what? They would have been just fine. And he has certainly allowed players to have growth and good things. But there's no doubt that they need to upgrade their coaching, their management, and everything else to take this thing to the next level.
Yeah, Paul, what do you make of the A, that quote, and B, just kind of the start to the season, where the standards at right now?
Well, Jacob, you're being too hard on DJ. I listened to it. You must have gone off somewhere before he actually finished elucidating the situation. But he actually said we should be 5-3. So, by his own admission, he's fallen short. I guess whether he keeps his job or not, this organization, the new management, is evaluating everybody and everything, and they're going to take their time doing that. I guess they're going to look at, for example, has he lost the room? I know in Calgary, Daryl Sutter lost his job because, like he always does, he loses the room after a couple of years because of his style, and he's gone. I agree with Simmer. He's a nice guy. Players seem to like him, but I don't know that he's holding players accountable. I mean, I looked at that New York Islanders game that they lost, and there were guys that were just not playing hard. And I don't know why in that situation you've got anybody on that bench that's not playing hard. So, I think he's a goner. If, I looked at their schedule. Basically, I think they've got to be 580, playing 580 hockey at the end of November to be on track for getting a playoff spot and a wild card spot at that. And to do that, they've got to win 6 of 9 games. So if he hasn't won 5 or 6 of those 9, he's not long for this world.
Yeah. Dayton, where do you sit with DJ right now?
Unsurprisingly, I'm with the other two. I read on Twitter that, and I can't remember who said it, and I looked for it and I couldn't find it, but that 20 games is a pretty standard cutoff point for a beginning of the season coach. People love Smith, but I'm wondering if maybe he's just not head coach material. He's assistant coach, because that's where he was in Toronto and seemed to be doing very well there, which earned him that promotion. Like if he does not win the next 6 and 9, like Paul was saying, that's honestly probably it.
And you're pointing out to the Toronto work date, and he was able to get a Zaitsev because he coached him for the 4 years there, identified that he was an elite shutdown defenseman. So that is certainly very positive.
Yeah.
You know what? And I say this, guys, I paid $950 million US for an Ottawa Senators, which is a complete overpayment. I'm going to be hemorrhaging money. I'm going to have so much trouble here in trying to get a new building. These windows that open to win a Stanley Cup, and there's no salary cap on coaching and management. You know what you do? You go and spend as much as you can. The Ottawa Senators window is open this year, not to win the cup, but your window's now open. By the end of this year, is Tarasenko gone along with Kubalik? Drew will be a year older. What do you have there? What are you going to do with Thomas Chabot? You start to look at this stuff. It's a sense of urgency. Why did Lou Lamoriello fire Claude Julien right before the playoffs and win the Stanley Cup? Like, you realize when the moment's there, don't go through this whole year. And I've worked in the business, and I understand, and I'm sure Paul, everybody knows, hey, you become close with people. It's not easy, but new people have come in. There aren't the emotional ties. This group wants to win a Stanley Cup. Do you have the people in place for that? Well, that's up to them to answer. And is that Peter Chiarelli? Does it end up being Claude Julien? Do you think you're better off for that? Well, I'll also say this. Don't wait till the 30 game mark to make that decision. You should survey this, and shouldn't even be about wins and losses, guys. You should quite simply be asking yourself, do you believe DJ Smith can get us to the playoffs, get us deep, and possibly win a Stanley Cup? And if he can't, then you make a change.
Yeah, that's very well put. Like, it does matter if you're 7-3 right now. If you don't think that DJ Smith can do this all season through the playoffs, you got to can him, find someone else.
Or when teams waiting around, guys, it's like we have to lose a game to fire the coach. And it's like, I remember years ago, Paul Maurice, they had Pat Burns in town. And Pat was going to get, and Paul won the game. They went to the finals that year. It can get pretty crazy, but I've never understood that logic either. It shouldn't be. DJ Smith has been given more than enough time. What do you think as Andlauer and Staios come in? Do you think he's a good coach or not?
Right. And it all comes down to them. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, thank goodness we don't have to make that choice. That's an ugly one.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So that's kind of all the talking points we had for today. Is there anything else you want to chat about real quick, Simmer?
No, I think that was great. And certainly happy to be on, guys. Fun to be back talking some Sens hockey.
Awesome. And it's I think a lot of us have been enjoying your podcast era even before you get your own going. Some great guest appearances on some other podcasts. So we appreciate your time, Paul, Dayton. I appreciate you coming as per usual. Like I mentioned before in the episode, make sure to check out the Ottawa Senators Substack and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Find us all on Twitter, and hope you enjoyed the episode. See you next week.